we are good to go, Senator Patterson, if you wish to take the call.
Thank you, Chair. I do. I have some questions about the Victims of Terrorism Compensation Scheme. The relevant officials at the table for that?
Yep.
Yes.
Great, thank you. I'll just find it in my notes.
Excuse me.
Okay, what's the process for declaring an overseas incident as a terrorist act for the purposes of the scheme?
Nathan Smythe, Deputy Secretary, National Security and Resilience, Commonwealth Counter-Terrorism Coordinator and National Counter-Foreign Interference Coordinator. Senator, there is a well-run process that goes through. I'll just get my details in relation to how that happens. At the outset, though, the scheme provides financial assistance, as you know, to victims, to Australian residents who are harmed or whose close family members are killed.
Thank you. That's helpful but not necessary.
So the declaration process is that following an offshore terrorist incident, the Home Affairs consults with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to determine whether there are any Australians that are impacted by the event. We can then provide advice to the Minister for Home Affairs with a recommendation.
I apologise for interrupting, but it was very evident very early on, given an Australian was killed on the 7th of October, that Australians were affected, wasn't it? Shouldn't have required much consultation with DFAT to work that out.
No, Senator, but the declaration goes to the sites that may be declared as relevant to the AVTOP scheme following and provides for the Minister to provide a recommendation to the Prime Minister to declare. So there was quite a bit of work that was undertaken to determine, in collaboration with Foreign Affairs and the Post in Tel Aviv, as to what particular sites would be eligible for that declaration.
Okay.
So
sorry, I interrupted you. Please continue.
So the Prime Minister has to take into account the following in terms of the declaration criteria: the nature or extent of the terrorist act, the extent the terrorist act targeted or impact Australia or Australians, whether a terrorist organisation has claimed responsibility for the act, and of course not every offshore incident involves a declaration that is made. But once the Prime Minister has made the declaration, then Services Australia administers the payment process. It determines a claimant's eligibility and the processing claims and payments associated with the overall scheme. There are two, eligibility arrangements. The first is a person is a primary victim of a declared overseas terrorist act if the person was in the place where the terrorist act occurred and was harmed as a direct result of that terrorist act, and a claim for an AVTOP by a primary victim must be lodged within 2 years of the day that the declaration is made. Then there is a secondary victim of a declared overseas terrorist act if the person is a close family member of a person who was in the place where the terrorist act occurred and died before the end of 2 years starting on the day of the terrorist act occurring as a direct result of that terrorist act. And then the scheme goes into the family members who are classified as secondary victims. It can be a person's partner, it can be a person's child, a person's parent, a person's sibling or a person's legal guardian. And for secondary victims, their claim must be lodged within 12 months of the date of the declaration.
Thank you. All very interesting, but not really germane to my question. Just to be clear, who's the decision maker? Is it the Prime Minister or the Minister?
The Prime Minister makes the declaration under the scheme on a recommendation from the Minister for Home Affairs.
Right. And when did the department provide advice requiring a decision from or a recommendation from the Minister for Home Affairs to the Prime Minister?
Thank you, Senator. Hayley Petrie, I'm the Acting Assistant Secretary for Counter-Terrorism Strategic Policy. As you know, the terrorist attacks actually occurred on the 7th of October. The media reported the death of one Australian on the 10th of October. That was then verified by the Minister for Home Affairs on the 11th of October. In between that time, the department worked with intelligence and consular services to identify whether there were any other Australians involved, and there were ongoing discussions across departments to verify sort of the sites involved. As you would appreciate, it was a kinetic event, it was an ongoing conflict, and the department continually worked with our counterparts across agencies to keep a monitor of the situation. We had several conversations with the Minister's Office, resulting in advice being provided to the Minister's Office, I believe in January.
On what date?
Let me just check my notes. A written brief was provided to the Minister's Office on the 25th of January.
25th of January. The Minister announced it on the 2nd of February in a media release released after 5 p.m. on Friday. When was the decision actually made?
The decision was made on the 2nd of February. The Prime Minister signed the declaration for the activation of the scheme on the 2nd of February, Senator.
Right. Was the department involved in distributing the media release?
I'm not aware that we were actually, Senator.
We'll just get our media folks to come to the table and ask that.
It's on the department's website. At what time was it provided by the Minister's Office to go on the website?
We'll have to take that on notice, Senator. I don't have that information at hand, actually, in relation to the public declaration.
Does it strike you as unusual that a media release was sent out after 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon to announce this decision?
No, Senator, that would be a decision for the Minister's Office.
The Minister's media advisor is an experienced former journalist, who I won't name in this forum because it's not necessary. I don't think it will be lost on them that if you announce something after 5 p.m. on a Friday, it's not going to attract much media coverage compared to if you announce it earlier. The weekend papers are well and truly put to bed before 5 p.m. on a Friday. Most journalists are probably down at the pub or on their way home to their families. Why was the government anxious to minimise coverage of this decision?
I don't know what makes you think that is the case, Senator Patterson.
I can help you with that if you like. It was released after 5 p.m. on a Friday.
Well,
that's what makes me think that.
You've already heard evidence from the department that the decision was made the same day. So while I don't know, because it's not my portfolio, it would seem to me that the Minister was keen to announce the decision as quickly as possible once the decision was made.
Senator, it might be helpful if the team outlines for you the additional steps that the Minister asked us to undertake to make sure that there was a widespread knowledge of the scheme being released.
That would be helpful.
Yes, Senator. So we've been working very closely with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and their consular team to ensure that the mission in Tel Aviv is in contact with the victims and their families to ensure that that information is provided to them. We've also looked at providing information to the Australian Council, the Executive Council of Australian Jury, as well, to ensure that it is promulgated amongst the community, should there be secondary victims, etc. And we're also, there are a couple of other elements that we've done, but I know that there was correspondence that was provided through Andrew Hastie in relation to some victims. We've responded to in a letter directly to those individuals.
What date was that letter sent?
I'll have to check, but it would have been soon after the declaration was actually made, Senator. We wouldn't have been able to provide definitive advice until the declaration was made on the 2nd.
Because Mr Hastie wrote to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Home Affairs on the 18th of December, and by the 19th of January, no response had been received from either of those officers, which led to the media coverage about it. I'm trying to find the date of Mr Clare's interview. On the 19th of January, Minister Clare was on Sunrise, I believe, and he said The Minister for Home Affairs will have more to say about that in due course. I expect that the Minister for Home Affairs is looking at that. The Minister for Home Affairs is looking at that at the moment. The Minister for Home Affairs is examining it at the moment. You'd not yet provided your brief on your evidence to the Minister on the 19th of January. So what was the Minister looking at on the 19th of January?
Well, I think there'd been conversations with the Minister's office in January in the lead up to the declaration being made and the department providing advice to the Minister around that, and we were providing advice to the effect that we were still finalising the details of the 15 sites that have been declared under the AVTOP scheme for this purpose. So the Minister's office was being kept abreast of how we were progressing to finalise our advice to the Minister, who would then make the recommendation to the Prime Minister.
4 months is an extraordinarily long period of time to declare a terrorist event, one that is kind of self-evident on its face is a terrorist event. I appreciate there is technicalities about sites and other things, but I mean, in the case of the family that Mr Hastie wrote to the Prime Minister about, again without identifying them publicly, they lost 3 generations of their family on the 7th of October and they had immediate financial needs arising from that. Is it really reasonable to ask them to wait for 4 months before they can even apply for assistance?
Senator Patterson, can I just give some context before handing over to Mr Smythe? I understand that the average time taken for governments to declare, if that's the right word, an event as an overseas terrorist attack for the purposes of an AVTOP is 7 months. This event was declared to be a terrorist event around actually just under 4 months. And in fact, I'm advised that the last declaration made by the former coalition government occurred 2 years, 2 months and 2 days after the stabbing attack in London. So I accept that to you, it may seem that, and to the families involved, 4 months may seem like a fairly long amount of time, but it's actually considerably shorter than the average, Minister, and a lot shorter than the last event that occurred when your government was in power.
This is not just any other terrorist incident. It's the greatest loss of Jewish life on a single day since the Holocaust. Really, I wouldn't think it'd be beyond the capacity of the government and ministers to work more quickly than that to assist people in their time of greatest need, surely.
Well, and I would argue that that occurred because it was activated 4 months after the event rather than the average of 7.
Mr Smythe, returning to the announcement of the scheme being activated, I accept your evidence about the contacting of the relevant people, the potentially affected people, but it seems to me that the government wanted to narrowcast this announcement, not broadcast it, and it seemed that the government wanted to hide that announcement from the broader public.
By issuing a press release?
After 5 p.m. on a Friday.
On the day that the decision was made, how can you argue that something is being hidden from the public when the Minister issues a press release on the very day the decision is made, Minister, in addition to all of the other efforts being made to contact the people?
You've been around politics for a long time. You're not actually that naive. You know that if you put out a statement after 5 p.m. on a Friday, it is designed and it is achieved to get minimal coverage.
It was sent out on the day the decision was made. There was no delay in sending out the press release.
Is the reason for the curiously late announcement because the government was embarrassed about their failure to respond earlier on this?
There is no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the government is embarrassed by declaring an event to be a terrorist event well under the average amount of time it has taken past governments to do so. We're not embarrassed by that.
Last question on this matter, Chair. Thank you. I'm glad you said that, Minister, because Capital Brief reported last week that there was a meeting of the Labor caucus on Monday of last week in relation to matters in the Middle East, and that at least one member of caucus complained about the granting of this scheme to people affected and unfavourably compared that with the government's support for Palestinian communities. That seems to me like there was concern within the government about granting this, and maybe the government did want to minimise attention drawn to it.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, that didn't happen in any meeting that I was at, and I'm not going to comment on unverified claims that are made in media articles.
There were 20 Labor backbenchers. It was on Monday of last week. It was with the Foreign Minister. It's been reported in the media. Are you saying in that meeting didn't happen?
Of course I'm not saying that.
Okay.
You don't need to put words in my mouth. I mean, I know you've got a narrative here, but so far you haven't been able to provide any evidence whatsoever to back up the narrative. First, we took too long to do this. I've pointed out we took 3 months shorter than the average and a couple of years shorter than your government did the last time I had to do so. Every claim that you've made in this regard has no evidence.
Who was the Labor backbencher who objected to granting of these payments?
Well, A, I don't know, and B, I wouldn't breach my colleagues' confidentiality. I mean, we know on Nemesis your side of politics has no compunction about sharing private details of your own internal warfare, but I'm not going to breach confidences of my colleagues.
Might be best for both of you if we share the call around, Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Chair.